Hi, I'm Karen Greenberg, and you're watching a podcast where nostalgia comes alive. It's Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show. Roll it.
Welcome to Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show, where nostalgia comes alive. Join Jake and his friends on a journey through pop culture of the past, where they interview professionals in the worlds of acting, directing, writing, puppeteering, and so much more. Who will they be chatting with today? Find out in this Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show episode.
Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show, where nostalgia comes alive. Happy to be here with us. Thank you for joining. As always, I'm your host, Jake Steffenball. With me today, of course, our host, Chris Bixby and Matt Bingo. How you guys doing?
We are doing good. Jakey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you for asking. What do we have for today?
Yes, today's guest, she is a television writer. She also wrote a bunch of books. Some of the shows that she wrote for on TV include Between the Lions, Lomax The Sound of Music, Johnny and the Sprites, Cyberchase, whole bunch of things that we'll talk about later. Here she is, Louise Gikow. Louise, happy to have you here. How are you?
I'm fine, and I really appreciate your pronunciation of the name. It's a difficult one. When I was in fifth grade and lower, every time they got to the G's, they'd go, Gavin, Gabe, and I always knew it was me.
Well, happy to have you here. So to kick this off, could you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. At the moment, I'm a freelance writer and composer. I have been in the past an editor, copy editor initially. The difference between that and an editor is copy editors are the ones who put the punctuation in and figure out whether things are English and make sure the spelling is correct and all that, and work on the writing as opposed to sort of choosing books or editing in that sense or making buying decisions. Let's see. Grew up in Queens, New York. Not the easiest of childhoods. A lot of neurosis flowing around, which I think a lot of people who end up in this business had. But basically, other than that, fairly standard 1950s. I have my, house, backyard, younger brother who was a pain, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Went to high school, Francis Lewis High School in Queens, and then Stony Brook as an undergrad. And then I spent a year at Columbia getting a master's in medieval literature, which is about as far as I could get from, I guess, where I ended up when you think about it. Unless you have anything specific, I can go on and tell you what happened next.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, you do.
So basically, thank you, by the way. You guys submitted a list of questions for me, so I'll sort of follow along in that. It's interesting. You asked what inspired me to go into writing, and nothing, because I never expected to do it. Basically, we were, as everybody else probably you've interviewed, or a lot of them were in the Vietnam era. And as I graduated from college, a lot of my friends were heading for Canada or heading for law school, male friends, that is, or heading for teaching. And I had no desire at that point really to be a teacher, and I wasn't affected by the war in that sense, although I did a lot of demonstrating. But I was interested in medieval literature, and I applied to some graduate schools because I literally didn't know what I was going to do. And I got into Columbia with a scholarship, so I thought, well, it's paid for, I'll move back to Manhattan and see what happens. And I did that for a year, but unfortunately for me, Manhattan was a much more interesting place than Columbia University was at that point. And I got a job playing piano for a singing teacher, and then did some piano bar work and stuff like that, and didn't really pay much attention to Columbia. So I sort of left there after a year. They were very nice. They gave me my master's certificate, wherever it is. And at that point, I needed to earn a living. So I started to apply for as many publishing jobs as I can think of, because when you were an English major in college, that's where you went. It was pretty much what you did. And I had no feeling of being different as a woman. I have to say, for my parents' credit, I was just as ambitious and was expected to do just as well as anybody else, including my brother, who did quite well. And I expected to be able to get a job, but it was very hard to get a job at that point, because I think there were a lot of English majors hanging around New York City at that point, so I kept getting rejected. And then I saw, this is the classic, you guys will be way too young, but those who are older than, I guess, 70 will remember, in Manhattan, there used to be a campaign in the New York Times, and it would show a picture of a face and said, I got my job through the New York Times. And that was when people advertised for jobs in printed matter, just like they did for dates back when. A friend of mine met her husband through New York Magazine.
Oh, wow.
And I actually was looking at a New York Times ad or ads for jobs. And there was Muppet Magazine, Right Do Not Call, Georgia Golia, and it was 635 Madison Avenue. Can't believe I remember that. And I knew Muppets because Muppets Magazine had started a year before I graduated college, and I had some guy friends. I was an RA in a hall who read it all the time. And I thought it was great, but not to my taste necessarily. But at that point, I really needed a job. And the only offer I had was for a publication about the laundromat industry, which literally means laundromats, which is where you wash and dry clothes. So I wrote a letter, and, in terms of any value that this has for anybody, the letter I wrote, I was so frustrated by that time, because remember, you're writing letters not on a computer, you're typing them and retyping them and putting them in the mail and putting a stamp on them. It was basically, well, I've applied to about 100 jobs, and I'm sure I'm going to be one of 1 million people applied to this job, and you're never going to respond to me, so fuck you, but goodbye. And literally, I swear, I think I said fuck you in the letter. And of course, I got an interview, which was not my intention. I mean, my intention was to get an interview, but not writing a letter like that. So, one of the things I suppose with anybody's career in any of these businesses is take the stupid risk. Occasionally, you got to, I'm not a risky person. I'm very risk averse, but every so often, things like that pay off. And I think what happened, I went in to meet the copy editor at that point. And basically, I think they thought I could handle the office because my attitude was that. And I could handle the office, although my attitude wasn't exactly that. So I actually got the job, which was, I had one dress that I wore, which I might as well not have worn. It was brown, as I recall. And I started out there as an editorial assistant, and the editor at that point, the copy editor, left a year later, so I moved up. And that sort of began it all. It was a little bit of gall and a lot of luck. And the New York Times, I guess. I'll keep talking as long as you want me to without interest in, giving me questions, if that's okay.
If you want to, sure.
I will, stop me if you have questions. I can talk endlessly. Lampoon. So let me tell you a little bit about the Lampoon, because it really was, in many ways, the most extraordinary thing I ever did. It's funny for a show like this, which is more nostalgia-oriented, and I suppose also more kids-oriented a little bit, looking at your adorable sign. The Lampoon sort of doesn't fit in there, but it sure fit in there for me because it's how I got the rest of my jobs. It was an extraordinary place. If I had ever been inspired to have a career in writing, I think I would have dropped it the minute I walked in there, because I was working with the smartest and best comedy writers in the business. And my feeling is comedy is king and hard, as the old saying says. And these were incredible guys. And really, I think they were very relieved, because one thing that O'Donoghue said to me in the beginning, he said, I really like you because you don't edit out my comedy. I think they had experiences with people who didn't get it. And at least, I could speak English and I could write English, and I was sort of reasonably literate. And so I knew what was funny and what wasn't, and I never did that. And I really appreciated that from him. I did a teeny bit of writing, but it was really by grace of Sean Kelly more than anybody else. And it was fun, but mostly it was editing. Every single one of them was marvelous. I could spend 2 hours talking about every one of them, and difficult and funny. I remember O'Donoghue once putting his fist through a wall, and somebody threw a lit match into a garbage pail at one point, and we had the fire department come.
Oh, wow. My goodness.
It was okay. It didn't spread.
That's good.
But they were brilliant. They were really brilliant writers. And the only reason I left was after 6 years of it. Well, things were changing. I mean, again, I could tell you a lot about what went on, but Henry left, Henry Beard, for a variety of reasons, which you can interview me about on another program. And PJ O'Rourke came in, and I really was very fond of PJ. My parents died around that time, and he wrote me the most beautiful letter of condolence. It was the one I remember most, and I know a lot of people had mixed feelings about him. But more politically than anything else. But none of these guys were anything but kind and good. And it was hard work. I mean, the first magazine I edited it was the issue, if you guys know the Lampoon at all, that had a picture of a dog with a gun pointing at its head, and it said, if you don't buy this issue, we'll kill this dog. And Henry Beard had a piece in that called Law of the Jungle, which was half in Latin and hysterically funny, but terrifying. It was like 20 pages of the most abstruse, funny, unbelievably difficult to edit stuff you ever knew. So it was terrifying. But he had left and the magazine was changing, and Maddie Simmons, who was also nothing but nice to me, although, well, we won't go into that, really was pushing the magazine in a different direction. The politics were gone, sex was in, and it was 6 years. And I thought, what the hell am I going to be doing if I'm still here when I'm 40? So I left, took a job at a fashion magazine that I knew was going to die because I wanted insurance, and then went on to do a batch of freelance work, Workman Publishing, a batch of that with a lot of these guys. And after that, through people I met, I got a freelance job. I wanted something steady, but not full time. So luckily, I met Katie Dobbs and ended up with a job at Muppet Magazine. That's where we get into your neck of the woods, I think. And I ended up being an editor there for a year or two. And then Jane Leventhal, who was one of the most wonderful people, who was the editor at the Henson Company, as it was known then, hired me to be an editor in her department. And what I can say about the magazine, because you did ask, is in addition to really having a lot of fun and also working in totally empty offices that were, on the 34th floor, there was nobody around us, but it was just newly constructed, but 5, rooms that were us, which was very weird, but had great views of sunsets.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was odd. I don't even know why. Don, our publisher, sort of got, I guess it was space that was there and he could afford it or whatever, or he had connections. But I think the most interesting thing about that, and it's, I think why in a way I ended up where I was with more writing, was that I met Frank Oz. Because we wanted to do a column of Piggy letters, which was pretty, obvious at the time when you think about it. Who would be a better columnist for how to deal with romance in your life than Miss Piggy? And Frank took, and I would imagine still takes, except that he doesn't perform with her anymore, Miss Piggy extremely seriously, as well he should. And it's why she was so brilliant, I think. She had an entire backstory. He knew where she came from. He knew about her brothers and sisters and her family. And it was incredibly intimidating for me initially, although he was unbelievably nice to me. I basically went to the Muppet offices at that point, and he sat down with me and told me all about Piggy, and then I had to write her, which was a struggle, but a lot of fun. I don't think I ever really did her justice, but it did go on for a while. And it was sort of how I met the Muppets, because I was too old, really, in a sense, except for the movies, to have watched the show. And then when Jane hired me, I thought, well, this is cool. I'd like to work there. So I tend to work at jobs a long time. I worked there for about 11 years. I worked there through the time that Jim died, which was a horrific tragedy, but had a lot of fun. I was very lucky. Jim, I guess, thought I had something to give. So I was included in a lot of the creative meetings over the years, for ideas.
Right.
And it's a amount of fun. We'd go in for weekends and talk to like the best people doing theme parks at that time and the best people doing computer stuff at that time, because Jim was always interested in everything, and so was I, and we always wanted to expand our horizons in terms of what he could do. And he had always been an experimenter. You may have seen his films, the early films, which were quite extraordinary. His creative stuff was amazing, way before Muppets. So I was really lucky with that. And then because I was working for Jane and we were starting to write books about characters, the first major show that was sort of in production when I got there, in addition to movies, was Fraggle Rock, which was wonderful. And I got a chance to write a lot of Fraggle Rock.
Oh, I love that show.
Yeah, it was heaven. Well, there you get back to Jocelyn and Larry Merkin and Michael Frith, who did the amazing design. And that show, more heart, and actually, see, here's what my memory for names goes. The two Canadians who did the music, the most extraordinary music. If you haven't noticed it, everybody out there, go back and listen to the songs. Brilliant. Oh, yeah. Absolutely brilliant stuff. So I was lucky enough to meet everybody up there. I went up there a lot because I had to learn about it in order to write the books. And Great. I'll never forget, I had to write a book for Jane. This is really the first actual serious kids writing I ever did, when I sort of thought, well, maybe I could be a writer, even if I wasn't an author. or I could be, practically speaking, I could do something in the writing area, was I had to write my first Fraggle book. And I wrote a book called What's a Fraggle, a rhyming kids book, in about 5 minutes. Jane said to me, write a book about Fraggles, and we decided we were going to do that. And I went back and I was like, like I was, running a race, but it just sort of poured out of me. And I went back and gave it to her literally 5 minutes later, and she went, whoa. And it got published. My second was The Doozer That Didn't, which was sort of composed in a similar way. And it's kind of why, because it was a lot cheaper to have me write than it was to pay anybody else, that I ended up writing probably over 100 books for Muppets, even though there were many better books than I. I think Jocelyn is a brilliant writer. We had other writers who were good, but I always think of myself as a really serviceable writer who likes learning about a lot of things. And I say this because I think as people watch this, you need to know that you don't have to be a brilliant writer in order to write. You need to know that you don't have to be brilliant anything in order to contribute and to do a lot and to have a tremendous amount of fun and work with some amazing people. I could do it. And I never overestimated my abilities, but I didn't underestimate them. And I love learning about things. So recently I wrote a book about artificial intelligence, which happens to be what my husband teaches at City College, but had nothing to do with that whatsoever, because I thought that would be fun to learn. So I worked with a business guy who does services, and so learning a lot of things, learning how to do things, writing, and also writing educational stuff for kids meant I had to learn about really a lot of what I was writing about, which was important too. So I did a lot of books for Henson. I started to do a little bit of TV, but things sort of fell apart before I actually got there. Joss helped me a lot with a script that I did for a series that they did, but the series stopped before I had a chance to do it. And then, and Jim passed away, which was a whole other story. And I stayed there a lot. And it was wonderful to be there. It was interesting. But again, I was there for a very, very long time. And I felt like I get too comfortable. And again, because I love the people. And I thought, I really got to leave. So, and you mentioned actually writing books about films. Well, that's a good example of craft. I did, in addition to a lot of books for Fraggle, and I was involved in the creation of Muppet Babies, so I did a lot of books for Muppet Babies, which was a lot of fun. And I learned a lot about kids' TV, and also how frustrating it was to have kids' TV on 3 different networks. And also the fact recently that it doesn't make any difference how many networks. You can be turned down by just as many when there are 25 as when there are 3.
Yeah.
Wrote a number of movie books, which was interesting too, because I relied on the movies, really. Again, I knew how to edit. That, I learned really how to edit very well at Lampoon. So they were fun to do. I watched the movies a lot. I used a lot of the dialogue. I wanted to make people happy. They liked what they had, so use it. But again, I'm not saying it's not creative, but nothing overwhelmingly so. Nothing that a lot of, I think, good, talented, sensible people, who can write a sentence could have done. I was very, very lucky. The music is different. I wrote a batch of things. I love music. I've been playing piano ever since I was 6, and it was enormously fun to do. And I'm good at writing songs, it turns out. I'm writing country songs right now with a friend of mine. We're trying to sell some things, but
Oh, nice.
yeah, it's a lot of fun. I was not even a country fan. My friend Janet and I have known each other for years. We actually got into a musical theater workshop with ASCAP many, 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 many years ago. And that's a whole other story too. But I love doing the music, and it was so much fun. Also, I love recording music. That I'd been doing for a long time. I actually had written rock, coming out of college, I was writing music. I actually had a very brief musical deal, but I never thought I was that good, so I never really followed through in it. But being in the studio and recording is immense fun, even when you were sort of cutting, so funny, a friend and I'm also studying guitar, which I used to play as well now. And we were talking about cutting and pasting on Pro Tools. And I said, yeah, we used to cut and paste on tape with razor blades, which is exactly what we did. This is 4-track and 8-track tapes. And it was enormous fun. And being in a studio with Jim singing Kermit on my stuff, there was sort of nothing more joyous than that.
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
That's
really,
awesome.
it was lovely. And it's sort of sad now because I get occasional people who ask for copies of the songs. They were on little audio tapes. And if any of you guys out there or any of you guys here have any versions of them that you would by any chance put on DVDs or even CDs or whatever. They're very hard to find, which is
Oh
really
yeah.
it's really sad. It's the same thing with Moby. I wrote for the National Lampoon Radio Hour with, well, Sean Kelly did most of the lyrics, I did the music, and Belushi played Ahab, a musical Moby Dick. We were laughing about it because of really all the serious things like Evita that were going on at the time that were, let's take a really serious thing like Sondheim did also, but of course a lot better. And so we did a musical there. And it's very hard to actually find those things, so if you can. But at any rate, there I ended. I freelanced again for a while, and then I worked for Nickelodeon for 2 years. Did a lot
Oh,
of
nice.
yeah, I ran the multimedia and publishing division. And again, you learn from people. And Jerry Laybourne was amazing. What I learned from Jerry more than even from Jim is the importance of knowing your audience.
Yeah.
And she knew her audience better than anyone. I mean, she was a teacher. She just had that feel. And really thinking about exactly who you are as a brand and delivering as a brand, delivering for your show, whatever it is, being consistent so that kids watch you and know that you're you and know that this is what you're delivering and this is what they're going to get. Incredibly important thing. And we all sort of did it somewhat subconsciously, certainly since the Lampoon, but it was interesting because when you start to develop shows yourself, which is kind of what I'm trying to do now and have been doing for a while, it's amazingly important to know that, to know what kids want to hear. It's
Exactly.
and then to sort of take off from there. I mean, no question, when you look at the original Nick animation, they took way, way off and did an amazing job. I mean, you look at SpongeBob, and that's a good example. But on the other hand, when you really look at SpongeBob and you look at the execs who picked that up, they used to have lists of what's Nickelodeon and what's not. And you wouldn't necessarily think that you could even do that, but they were so smart about it. And what struck me about SpongeBob, really strikes me about SpongeBob, in addition to the comedy, was the sweetness. It was, which is why I think it could appeal to 2-year-olds and 202-year-olds, because in addition to the humor, there was huge heart, which is so incredibly important. And even in a place like Lampoon, which you think, well, my God, heart is the last thing they had. They did. I mean, nobody wrote the Vietnamese baby book, which O'Donoghue did, without knowing what that meant. I don't care what they said or what you did, but nobody cared enough to do that in those days. And that was a way to handle, the tragedy that was going on and what we were doing politically. I wish we had people who could do that now, more than we do. But
Nice.
anyway, so I was with Nick for a while. And after a while with Nick, I really was interested in production, in both senses of the word, writing for TV, writing for film or music or whatever. And I realized that they were so good, and there was no place in that organization that I felt I could go. And I didn't want to stay with publishing, which I knew pretty well. So I left. I'd been offered a couple of jobs, and Chris Surf, who was doing Between the Lines, offered me that job.
Love Chris.
Yeah,
He's just the best.
Chris is the most darling person. He's just a darling person, that's all I can say, and incredibly talented. And funny as all get out. And I said, you bet, I'd love to do this. And Norman, of course, was just amazing. And,
Oh, yeah.
and I loved him
Norman
too.
too.
Yeah, very, just, again, it's the people. A lot of people who was like, how could I possibly, that's what made it wonderful. That's what made it fun.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Jim. As of taping, it's been 34 years since we lost him.
Oh God.
To the
I
day.
know. I know.
Yeah.
I was there that night with our head of PR, Susan, and I stayed with her until we found, and it was about, I don't know, whether midnight or 2 in the morning, until we found that he had passed away. And it was it was like wham. People blame a lot of people for what happened. There's a lot of nonsense that goes on in terms of, well, he was a Christian Scientist, blah, blah, blah. He didn't. I mean, Jim never stopped. And that was, by the way, I saw that, Matt, that look of confusion. People used to think that he didn't like to go to doctors, which was not true either, because his doctor, who was a cousin, had seen him a week or two ago, and all it looked like was the flu. And that's probably, what it was. And nobody really knew a lot about superbugs.
Right.
Gene came over just 2 days after he'd gotten sick and said, you got to go to the hospital. But Jim was nonstop. Jim, I was doing a meeting with him the day before, he and Michael and me and a few other people, and he canceled it. And you knew there was something wrong because he never did that.
Yeah.
But it was just like being punched in the gut for everybody. It was miserable. It was just, I mean, we've lost a lot of people. I mean, I lost a lot of people from even, Richard Hunt before that, and just so many brilliant
Jerry
people.
Nelson.
Oh yeah.
Jerry Nelson as well.
Oh yeah.
Carol Spinney.
Yeah. No, it's
Yeah.
really, it's
Yeah,
just
Jerry
so
Nelson.
many people. I mean, at least Carol and Jerry, got to be older, but, Richard, I mean, and, Jim too, when you look at it now and you think he could still be there. I mean, they could all still be. Ugh, at any rate, but enough of that, but it was horribly sad. But I did stay. I thought Brian, did a very good job. The company was still doing what it had to do. A lot of us stayed, but
Yeah.
it was time. I'd been there too long. So went to Nick,
Right.
left Nick, went to Chris, had a wonderful time. That's where I really got a chance to write a bunch of scripts. And again, there were a lot of people who were brilliant and funny script writers. I was not one of them, but what I could do, and what I still can do, is I can critique, I can edit, I can structure. So actually, I'm very proud of the fact, I think Chris might confirm this, that we were working with Boston PBS, GBH, the station, and they couldn't quite see the show. We could all see the show. They were our, production partner. And finally, I sat down, I said to Chris, and Norman, of course, helped me with this. I said, let me just write a show. Let me show them how it was structured. And they sent it into British Sullivan, and maybe it wasn't the greatest show. I don't even know what show it was. I can't remember. If you ask what my favorite show is, it was that, because it was the thing that said to Bridget, oh, I get it. I see how you would do the show. I see how it gets produced. I see how it's going to be structured. I see how it hangs together. So, which is the kind of work that I really do take pride in, because I would rather hire somebody else. I work with a writer now who's a puppeteer named David Feldman, who's hysterically funny.
Oh yeah, David Matthew
David
Feldman.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Love
he is,
David.
it's interesting, he's a
the
great
best.
puppeteer, but he's a great guy. And he and I make a great team, because I'm really good at a number of things, but he is one of the funnier writers I know. And again, I actually need to find him now some additional writing to do, because he's younger than I am by a lot. And, we have to try to sell things, but I want him to work more than that, because he's really brilliant. And I also feel like, other people, like when I was working for Johnny and the Sprites, I worked with Chris Nee. I had met her before. She is a brilliant and funny and special and unique writer. She's I don't want to call her the Disney writer, but she's done some extraordinary shows there. And people you may not have heard of, Ray Langford, who is one of the funniest women writers, who was an actress, who was a friend of Ken Scarborough's, who worked for us and now has a huge children's TV career. Billy Aronson, you mentioned, who I think is an extraordinarily
Billy.
wonderful writer. But I'm good at
great.
head writing. I'm good at, that kind of thing. So that's my sort of favorite Between the Lions episodes. I love that show. But again, I worked more out of the studio for that. The studio work was great. But it was more in the office work. Even though I did a lot of scripts, it wasn't the kind of show, Norman was head writing, that as a script writer, you're really not, invited to sets a lot. I could have been there, but it's too many bodies on a set, so I didn't feel like, whatever. But that went on for a while, and I loved it. I'm just gonna, again, I'm keeping going. I'm not giving you guys a chance to say anything. I was really lucky. I actually helped develop Lomax, because I've worked as, I never know what to call it, but there's a very, very talented and well-known contemporary composer named Bruce Adolph, who also, interestingly, having nothing to do with me in this sense, does some kids stuff. He will write for major orchestras. He ran the Lincoln Center Chamber Music Society for a long time. He does audio. He's written books, but very, I don't want to say intellectual, but really extremely well-rounded. And he was doing things for kids, and I wrote a batch of things for him. Some stories, sort of things, story for kids with classical music and some other things. And he told me about this guy who was looking to do a show named John Feyerabend, who has a particular, he's at University of Hartford, way of teaching little kids music. very interesting curriculum. And so I met John and we created a show and we went after a grant that John was given and we got it. And again, that part of it for me, it's kind of the best thing I could do because, again, it was me enabling other better people to go on with the actual work, if you will. And again, I love music. I love doing it. We did a little, pilot kind of thing to do that. And then Chris and Norman took it over and took the money and created some really lovely, lovely things. Things work and they don't. It's not the easiest business to be in unless you're very unusual. And even when you're very unusual, it's not the easiest business to be in, even when there are a lot of shows. And the other thing too is the older we get, the more young people come into it and the more I want them to. So, but it was a lot of fun.
Between the Lines is a wonderful show. One of my favorite episodes that I think you got to write was the Shooting Stars episode.
Yes,
Yes, I love that
thank
one.
you. Oh, and I got to write the song too, which was wonderful.
Yeah, the Mighty Star
Oh,
Line.
yes,
That's such a
I
beautiful
love that
song.
song too.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it
One of my
was-
favorites.
And
from
on the
that
subject
show.
of music team, Paul Jacobs and Sarah Durkee,
Oh my God,
Oh,
yeah.
they're amazing.
my
I was going
goodness.
to get to them. And Sarah, again, like Ray, like Chris, one of the most extraordinary script writers. Funny. I mean,
yeah.
you can tell in a way by her lyrics. People don't think of her as a script writer, and it wasn't something I think that she's loved to do, because I think working with Paul was extraordinary for her. And as a lyricist, she had more self-confidence, I think, which is insane because she's one of the smartest and funniest and best writers who I know. But, oh yeah, I mean, that's another thing about, it's funny, it goes back to Fraggle Rock too. And it will come into Sprites, which is kind of what happened next for me, I guess, although there are a few other things that are before that in terms of Sesame Street. The international stuff is sort of woven in through this. But the music, let me talk a little bit about Sprites for a moment, and then we can double back if we have any time and you're interested to some of the international Sesame Street stuff I did, because Sprites was lovely. I got involved, well, actually, this is what happens in a life. It all connects together. I got involved in Sprites because of Johnny Tartaglia, really.
Yes.
Oh, that
Good
Johnny,
friend of ours.
he's just
And
the
also,
best.
One of my
yeah, and
favorites.
it's a person named Jill
Yes.
Gobson, who I'm still very close to, who is an amazing producer. Johnny and Jill and I, with Louis Bernstein, who did a lot of curricular stuff and a whole lot of other stuff, international stuff with Sesame Street, did a program. We did a program about called Sesame Street English, basically, which was to teach
Yes.
English to foreign language speakers. And the idea was, and I still think it was a wonderful idea, and it sort of disappeared, and I wish it hadn't, was to be able to dub any language into whatever the foreign language was. So if Spanish was Spanish, if English was English, and to write it, if you were teaching Chinese or whatever, the English would remain the same. And basically you could sort of keep doing it and doing it and doing it depending upon the language you were dealing with. And it was a Berlitz project. They were the ones who did the funding for it. And Johnny was hired. Jill was the producer. Jill had done a lot of stuff for Sesame Street prior to that with Louis in international and other things. And she was very close to Lisa Simon, who I've also worked with, who we've lost again, which is a huge tragedy. Lisa started at the very, very beginning, first season of Sesame Street, and then became an amazing director for them. And we hired Johnny to play Tingo, who was the one puppet in the show. And Johnny, funny, energetic, incredibly, insanely talented. And we had a blast. We used, again, it sort of ties into music. There was a lot of music. We used a lot of Broadway actors. It was about a rock band that Tingo sort of became a part of, if you will. You have to watch it if you want to. Again, that's a hard one to find. And we hired a lot of wonderful singers and to be as a part of this band. A lot people have won Emmys since, because as we found out, unfortunately, a lot of Broadway actors are out of work a good portion of the time. So we got some really amazing ones. And Johnny was just a treat to work with, and we stayed in touch, and Jill stayed in touch. So when because of his lovely Broadway hit, Avenue Q, which was, again,
Yes.
talent, was
Yes.
asked by Disney to do a show of his own, and the Sprites came on. They were struggling a little bit, I think, to figure out what to do, which I got it, and he sort of knew what he wanted to do. So Jill got hired, I got hired, Billy Aronson got hired. So that was the four of us. And then, Oh, an amazing puppet designer got hired, whose name
Michael Schupak, yes.
Schupak, who's
I
incredible.
love Michael too.
Yep. And we came up with the show and did a show. And that was not the first show, but again, with Tingo, and then I had done another show. I did a couple of shows in which I was on set a lot with Sesame International. And again, being the head writer on that show and the head writer on the others, and being able to be on set, which is admittedly unbelievably boring in many ways and just takes forever to do. But again, the people are so extraordinary, and to get to talk to them, every one of them, sound, all that stuff. Camera people, directors, producers, costume people, hairdressers, the puppeteers, of course, or I haven't even said anything about them. Every puppeteer I've ever met was brilliant. I mean, there's nothing much you could say. And we had some pretty brilliant people on there in addition to John. Just unbelievable. So
Yeah, he's done an amazing job for Fraggle Rock now.
yeah, no,
Oh
and
my
it was
goodness.
wonderful. I mean, as an ambassador, and I love the fact I didn't realize, and I was so delighted to see that he was getting to perform as well, because so much of what he is a performer, and
Absolutely.
and so much of what he is an ambassador. You know, there are people who came on to puppets, you know, and he's one of them. Kevin was one of them, who at a very early age, whatever you feel morally or whatever, I thought Kevin was brilliant, and I really adored him, and that's a whole other issue, but who become sort of ambassadors for the work because of the passion that they have, because of coming into it the way they did. Because if you come into puppetry when you're in 7th grade and you're doing that the way Jim did, really, and people are looking at you funny very often, you know, especially, well, these days, but you develop a love for it and a strength that is quite extraordinary. And to see him doing what he's doing now, they were brilliant to hire him. And I hope he is loving every minute of it. He surely seems to be, because he's terrific at it, and he's great at it, and he's getting a chance to do something. And he was always a fan, of course. So it's a great thing. It really is. So at any rate, so that sort of brings back some of the Sesame Street stuff. That stuff was really interesting, you know, working earlier on with Johnny, but we also did an Israeli, Palestinian, Jordanian co-production, which now, of course, makes me weep. Oh, God. But again, different interview, different story. And a batch of other things with them, again, that were a lot of fun, and got to meet a lot more of the puppeteers. And also, it was part of the reason, I think, too, that I got hired to write the book, the 40th anniversary, which Bessie Laredo, who's an amazing editor and a very talented and funny writer, you know, was, I think, in certain ways, more about that book than I was. But what I did was I came up with an idea, and I was able to sit on the set and write what was going on, because I wanted to give everybody credit for it. You know, you wanted an opportunity I mean, you were zillions of pictures, but what you wanted was, it just wasn't Jim's show. It wasn't just the performers. It wasn't just the puppeteers. It was everybody. And the show was a combination of an extraordinary beginning and an extraordinary team. So it was a privilege, really, to be able to sit there and take notes and talk to people. And again, it was, you know, in a weird way for me, that's the research. And the research is being with the people and learning. And it was just so much fun, and it was such an honor.
It's such a great book. I'm kind of curious, did you get to interview any of the like Muppet performers or anyone from Sesame Street for it?
Yeah. Well, I got to talk to a lot of people. Yes, I did.
Nice.
I have a lot of tapes.
That's great.
I mean, you know, at that point, Frank was, you know, when I was doing it, Frank wasn't involved, but I already knew him very well. And I really got to sit down with everybody, which, again, some of the people who I didn't know because I had left Muppets, you know, before they came on board, just an extraordinary bunch, and tremendous fun and incredibly nice. And it's also, you know, it's all sort of smushed together. So, yeah, everybody was wonderful. I mean, I could, you've probably interviewed them, so let them tell you about their lives. But for me, again, it was a joy to hear. And also, again, interesting, because I think every one of them, Joey, you know, is a good example of that. Joey Mascherino.
Joey Mascherino, yes,
I
love
mean,
Joey.
a whole batch of people who were just, again, because of, you know, I was lucky enough to be not early on with the Muppets, but earlier. with the sort of founders of it, the people who sort of began it, all the original puppeteers. And a lot of the people who took over, again, were people who really loved the characters, who really cared. There was a level of commitment in a very difficult situation. It was extremely challenging to get the voices right, to get everything sounding like what they were supposed to sound like. It's funny, when my daughter was like 5 years old, no, actually younger than that, she met Jim a few months before he died. She used to call Kermit and Ernie, yeah. She burst into tears. He was holding her up. He said, "Is it me?" I said, "No, Jim." She's like a 6-month-old. But she used to call Kermit and Ernie Kermit, which I thought was very interesting. Which all goes to show you, and I do music, so for me, it's incredibly important that they sound right. Kids know. If it's not a Kermit voice, I think if it wasn't Jim, it had to be someone who could really, really do that voice. It was very, very hard. And same thing with Fozzie, same thing with all of Frank's voices, of course. And these guys came and wow, I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing how brilliant they are and how well they do. And, when you create your own character, in so many ways, it's so much easier. I mean, Leslie Carrera Rudolph, who was one of the most brilliant women I know.
Yes.
Oh,
I mean, we auditioned her.
Yes,
I met her when
absolutely.
she auditioned for Between the Lions, actually, and that's when I met her. And I adore her. She's incredible and quirky and wonderful and funny.
Yes.
And her husband's a damn good musician, too.
Yes.
But
Paul Rudolph, yeah, he's
Paul's
great
Paul's
too.
great too.
wonderful,
Yes.
wonderful. And Leslie, in creating her character for Sesame Street,
Abby gets Abby.
yeah, exactly. Abby could
Love
she
Abby.
could create Abby, and she's amazing. But when you think about it, I mean, not that there aren't new characters, but it's such a challenge, almost a muscular challenge, to go in as a great puppeteer and for somebody to say to you, you have to do Fozzie. You have to do
Right.
mannerisms. You
Yeah.
have to puppeteer him correctly because
Kind of like every puppeteer, like every main character,
exactly,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it's huge. And the physical puppeteering, it's interesting how specific and how difficult that is. Not only the voice and the delivery and all that, but to make them look like, in a way that is convincing their characters. Puppeteering is a difficult
Yes.
thing to do. You can't just
Absolutely.
go in and go like that. I mean, you guys.
It's so much. It's so much
There's a
than
lot to
that
do.
people think
Yeah.
of puppeteer
Yep.
because you have to go
Yep.
with the eye focus and then
Yep.
Especially
the
with
mouth
something
and-
like that.
Yeah,
Especially
and the
with
mouth is backwards, which always drove me
yeah,
crazy.
monitor be backwards and then you,
Yeah.
you go
Yeah,
go
it's
get
yeah,
hair
people-
out of the shot and then just go left or right or where they
Yeah,
have
exactly,
to go.
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah, especially with something like doubling, doing, say for example,
Or like like assisting. That's that can be
doubling,
that'd be
assisting, yeah.
difficult too.
It's way more difficult than you
Oh,
think.
God, yeah.
Yeah, and your puppeteers out there, trying to do like for example, because there happens where if the main puppeteer like it's not there
Right.
for a reason or something, and there's someone
Has to fill in.
yeah,
has to
oh
fill
my
in.
gosh, it's so
Yeah, it is not.
that's
easy.
also a
As a
much
matter of
difficult
fact,
thing too.
What would be fun? I mean, this is just a recommendation, but you should get a couple of people on to just talk about puppeteering if you haven't, because I think people would. It's a very interesting art form.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
Cheryl Henson is the person to first, go to for that because talk about, I mean, that's classic artwork and she's extraordinary in that way. But also, someone like Leslie, some people like, who know how to do it, who know how to learn it, and to talk
Kevin
about
Clash
the ways
and,
that it was
Matt
done, and
Vogel
how the
and-
use of the cameras and all that, because we can talk, all the people you've spoken to will touch on it.
Yeah.
But for me, it's a fascinating thing to see and watch and talk about nostalgia. I mean, it still goes on, but it's, really hundreds and thousands of years old. And it was one of the things that Jim was very interested in. And it might be fun to, not just do interviews, but, just do sort of a special on actually puppeteering and what it's like and how it's shot and
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
all that stuff. It's a lot of fun to do and it's interesting to think about too.
Oh, absolutely. That's definitely something we would consider doing. That
Yeah,
going
I
back,
think
going
Yeah.
back to Muppet Magazine for a little bit. You had mentioned the letters of Miss Piggy thing. I personally think that it was inspired. I have this here. I feel like it was inspired by Miss Piggy's Guide to Life. I've shown this on the show before, for those who remember. For you audio people, I'm holding up my own copy of Miss Piggy's Guide to Life. This was her first book that came out back in 1981. So just a couple years before Muppet Magazine began. I personally think that the letters and Miss Piggy kind of thing was inspired by this.
Well, actually,
'Cause it was huge
the
book.
other way around. It's the other way around.
Oh, what?
Yeah, the letters came way before this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's actually now there's an amazing man and he's going to kill me for not remembering his last name, Jim, who is also with Bill Prady, one of the young men who Jim Henson took in. Jim Lewis. Sorry, Jim, out there.
Lewis.
I love you.
Oh,
okay.
Jim.
Yeah, who's terrific and
right.
very, very
Yes.
funny, who went out to California along with Bill, who we need to say no more about because Bill has done incredibly well.
Oh, Bill, yeah.
Quite amazing. But
Yeah,
no, the Piggy
great
letters
guy.
actually happened before I joined, and a few years later is when we did that. And it's part of the reason that I felt I could do that book, because I felt at that point, Jim was a lot funnier again than I am, but between the two of us, I felt that we could capture her voice. And, it was a wonderful thing to do. They did a cookbook after that too of hers.
Yes, that's right.
And I think Cheryl herself
Right.
had been involved, Cheryl Henson in that. I can't remember, but and Cheryl and I did that wonderful Muppets Make Puppets book. Cheryl is an incredibly creative person, and I think I would like to see her get a lot more credit than she does, but I don't think she feels that way. But that was enormous fun because the kind of creativity that she had in terms of the visual and her feeling for color and pattern and it's stuff that I don't know anything about, and she is so extraordinary about. And the makering of it, and the imagination to do that. There's an amazing show that Jim did. Cloud Forest is the last two words of it. It was a longer title, and Cheryl did all the design for that. And if you ever have a chance to see it, you should. It is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. The puppeteering is lovely, and the puppets are lovely, but the colors and the design, and it just jumps off the screen at you. For me, it's color is incredibly important, and that sort of design is incredibly important, and I have no gift for it whatsoever. And Cheryl did that on that show, and it's, for me, one of the examples of the extraordinary work she could do. So doing that book with her was just a joy. And people actually seem to use it occasionally too, which was kind of fun. But again, it's about learning how to do things and then being able to describe them,
Yeah.
which was enormous fun. So there's that. So let's see what I can do. So I guess, so after some of that stuff, I did some writing for shows like Cyberchase, some of the animated stuff, which again was really, really interesting because you get to learn about the math. Did a little bit of stuff like that. I did write a little bit for Peep in the Big Wide World, but they had so many unbelievably good writers. I mean, I think I wrote an episode or two, and that was it. And
Wonderful
I wouldn't-
shows.
just fabulous.
We
And
grew up
they-
watching those two,
Yeah.
particularly. Such,
Oh, thanks. Yeah, no, the original, that again, you come again on to the creatives in that, the original creator of the books is just extraordinary. GBH did a great job. Kathy did a great job with that.
oh yeah.
Same thing with Cyberchase. There were some amazing writers and creators, and the head writer of that was just an amazing Hollywood writer whose name I do forget. I'm so sorry, but he was wonderful as well. And then I think what happened then for me was, David and I had been working together for a few years at that point because he had an idea. And actually, Jocelyn Stevenson, this is David Feldman, recommended that he contact me because she's in the UK. And I liked him enormously, and I guess he liked me enough to start to work with me. And we were pitching to a New York PBS station, NET, WNET, and there was a grant that they had to do online shows. And it was in the very beginning of sort of online, short form, if you will, shows. And we pitched a batch of things. And one thing that I had done with Jim years and years before that, in terms of actually, it ties into sort of the Sesame English, Jim had an interest in doing language instruction. There was a lot of desire at that point, and in China, interestingly enough, in which kids were learning, 13-year-old girls apparently, we were told, were learning English from Sesame Street. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was still used as a language instruction tool because it's, early young language, and that's how they were learning language. And so we actually did a lot of meetings, and we did a lot of research about doing a language instruction show when Jim was there. And I learned an enormous amount again about learning language. And so one of the things that David and I pitched was a language instruction show called Noah Comprende, which then became Oh Noah. And we were totally shocked. We actually got the grant. This was from any National Education Association, a government grant, to do that one. So we put together that show. And, the idea of it again was that you could do it with Spanish, which is what we did, but you could do it with other languages as well. And it did fine, and we did a number of them, and and then the world changed and things changed, and we did try to do a TV show. PBS was great. Linda Semensky, who is one of the most brilliant people in kids TV, actually gave us the opportunity to try to create a show, but it didn't work on TV for a number of reasons. We had some ideas, but it sort of it just didn't work, and that was kind of that. But that was enormous amounts of fun. At that point, I actually did Space Racers, which you mentioned, which was also terrific. I met Alan Newfield, who is a great writer and producer, and a number of other people who were really great with that. That was a wonderful show and a lot of fun. And I think was interesting to me, particularly because the man who sort of created it, and I apologize because, again, I wasn't connected with it enough for me to remember the names, and don't blame my age, blame me, because I've always been bad at that stuff. Basically raised the money, and just decided this is what he wanted to do, and they made it happen.
Oh, it's on Witcher.
Well, it is now, but it wasn't.
Julian
Yeah, but
Cohan.
it wasn't originally done for any particular network. It was done a number of years ago, and he just was totally, and it's hard to do this. I mean, believe me, these things are expensive, but he put together an incredible group. The director, who also was, director of animation, and they did the animation, did some of the most beautiful work. I mean, it was inspiring, and it was just fun to work on. It was a great show, and I'm glad to see now, these things have lives, because, you do a show like that, or you develop anything, and this is the problem with developing, and it either is going to hit them or it's not, or it's going to be too much like something they're doing or it isn't. And, there's a limited amount of ideas out there anyway, really, at the end of the day. So with something like that, there was, I think, there may have been some outer space, or at least that kind of shows sort of out there at that point or whatever. So it didn't quite become a network show. And then it was a little bit before, I suppose, Netflix and Amazon, et cetera, got into the kids business, but they either work or they don't. And really the only thing you can do is keep pitching and pitching and pitching and coming up with ideas, which is not the most fun thing in the world, but you do it. And at some point, after that, what I realized was, as I was getting on, working as a writer, I think when you're young, it's the best time to really look to start your career by learning shows and doing scripts, sending them in, trying to make connections. It's a great way to start a career. But after a while, the problem with it really ends up being that you need to learn a show so well when you're sort of starting that it'll take you weeks and weeks and weeks to write an hour script that you may or may not be paid $3,000 for. So if you're beginning a career, and if I was beginning now, I would be happy to do it. I think it's really, if you're not just creating stuff, it's the real way to go, or get hired by somebody. But as I got older, what I realized is that it wasn't really, my strong point was not comedy, not writing funny scripts. And it takes such a long time to sort of learn a show if you're not creating it. So I sort of thought, I want to just create stuff and we'll see what, whether anything happens. And that's sort of how the relationship with David is going now. And it's how Onoa sort of was. And we have a batch of stuff out there now. We have a whole batch of projects. We were working, unfortunately, the writer's strike sort of kiboshed a few things. We were working with a wonderful producer in Canada, but then they won't hire Americans because Americans were on strike. And then, of course, if you're working
Makes
with Canada,
sense, yeah.
it's Canadian content.
Yeah.
And you have to, but we keep trying.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. And I know Matt had a question about one of the other Muppet books you got to write.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, you had briefly brought it up a moment ago. The Muppets Make Puppets.
Yes.
Very, very unique concept, I might add.
Yeah. And that was Cheryl's idea, totally. Because again, with Cheryl, who is such an extraordinary designer, has such an extraordinary visual sense, really was also the person who I think was closest to Jim in terms of her love of all sorts of puppetry, which is why she got involved in the Puppet Festival. She's still involved in a lot of the extraordinary international puppet work that goes, into New York now. And we were very lucky because Workman Publishing, which did that book, really, and actually in a funny way, gave me my first freelance editing job after I left a variety, Lampoon and a few other places. And I actually freelance edited at Workman a lot when I was freelancing. They loved this kind of thing. This was not the easiest book in the world to deal with, but Workman was very interested in, designery books, books that would teach, books that were, they did a whole lot of things with photography and color, and they were willing to do this, which I think, maybe Abrams, an art book publisher might, but that was not what it was for. And Cheryl really thought that it was important, and so do I. We thought, and I hope that maybe schools have used it since, and some of the techniques are wonderful, and the parents have used them, because she came up with the most wonderful and creative things that she made, and then we shot, and it was a lovely project for that reason. But I was just lovely to be a part of it and to be able to translate into whatever language made it easier with Cheryl, how to do this stuff so it was doable. But again, you have to really, Cheryl Henson was it in terms of that. I don't mind, by the way. Sorry, Brian. Sorry, Lisa. Sorry, everybody else. And Heather, who's the most amazing. I don't mean to only talk about Cheryl, but actually she's the person who, because of the work that I did and what happened, ended up being the closest to. They're all insanely talented and amazing and wonderful.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
What went into writing for the sing along with Kermit and Friends book and tape sets?
Well, not again. Just I worked with a friend, Ellen Weiss, who was a writer as well. We sat around the piano and came up with these songs. I mean, it was the easiest and most weird thing I've ever done. It was just of its time, because there was a time when people were doing books and tapes, what they used to call, which is you'd package it in a sort of, shrink wrap package, and it would be a little book, and it would be actually I did that backwards. It would be a little audio tape up there and a book down here, and it could be stories with audio narration. It could be stories with songs attached and whatever. And we thought it would be fun to do stuff like that for Jim to do. He loved music. He loved, he enjoyed the singing. I don't know whose idea it was. It may have been mine. It may have been Jane Leventhal's. We just came up with it or it may have been the publisher at the time. I'm not even sure. It could have been Random House. Who knows? But we were sort of, Ellen and I sort of went away. We actually did a lovely other song it was a UN book that we did for the United Nations later, and we did a song for that as well. God, there was a lot, but I can't talk about it all. But we literally just sort of sat here. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, gosh. No, that happened. That was the UN book. I'm thinking when my daughter, Jim had already passed away, but when my daughter was very, very little, she literally sat here in one of those crazy swings, and Ellen and I sat in front of my piano and wrote that. But it was the same thing before she was born. We just wrote a batch of songs. We came up with 4 ideas. Are We There Yet, which was travel songs, and then 3 other sets of songs. And we just had a blast, and we played them for Jim and said, would you like to, would you do this? And he said, absolutely. He agreed. And Lauren Attanello, who was an amazing art director, who was doing the art direction for publishing at that point, found someone to do it, unless she did it, but we had a number of really great artists. And again, we went into a tiny little studio in a nondescript building somewhere or other, and it was literally, they were very simple, and Jim went into a studio, and I sat there watching him singing the songs and thinking, oh my God, we wrote those. It was like, holy cow. It was kind of a miracle. It was one of those tiny little things that, I guess, I don't want to say we owned it, because that's not really, none of this stuff is ownable. It's all everybody together. But that was a small part of the everybody. There were just a few of us, and it just made it very intimate for us, and very, very special to just get a chance to work with Jim in that way. And I mean, it's not that we got closer to him or anything like that, but it was a privilege, really. And some very special time. And, that kind of recording situation in a studio is also, something I adore. So, but I'm glad you know about it, because, not a lot of people do. And I think kids would love them. I mean, if
think
I
so
were
too, yeah.
anybody who had any copies of them, I'd put them out on, on some sort of album now. I mean, or put them on Spotify. Lord, as kids songs from Jim Henson.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine? I mean, but no one's, and I think kids would love them. I think parents would love them. They're sweet. They're simple. So somebody out there who has them or controls them or whatever, I don't know who it is anymore, if it's Disney. I mean, just find them and do something with them, because otherwise it's such a waste. And it was such a special time, even if you can't do the actual product. And they could be out there streaming.
They could be.
Right.
Yeah.
Do something, you guys.
Yeah.
No, I was. You had brought up Kevin and John Tartaglia earlier. I just remembered this story that John told us when we interviewed him a couple months ago. Speaking of, most of you know he started with Sesame as a teenager. I think he started in '94.
Yeah,
a couple
when he was
years,
like 16 or
16 years old. People, insane. 2 years prior, he had been invited to the set of Sesame Street, which was not taped to Calvin Astoria then, because I think it was still a teletape, although I think it changed the name. I think it was Unitel at that time, or am
Yeah,
thinking
I think it was
something
too,
different?
actually.
Yeah, I know it was teletape for years, but they changed the name. Anyway, Kevin Clash was still there. He was Elmo for a long, long time. And he was doing casting for a long time.
Yeah.
But he had written him a fan letter, and Kevin had invited him to New York to see to film Sesame Street, and actually, I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to remember how it went. John told Kevin, I appreciate you inviting us, but why did you call? Because Kevin called John's mom, actually called him. He was like, thank you for inviting us, but why did you call? He said, you get so many letters. Kevin said, I recognize your name. Jim used to talk about you. And the floor was pretty much gone at that point.
Yeah.
And we were just like, wow. And this was like maybe, I don't know, a year and a half after Jim passed, maybe.
Yeah.
A year and a half, 2 years.
Like that.
Because this was 1992. Again,
yeah, then
just before they moved to Calvin Astoria in '93.
Yeah.
And then Kevin called Johnny, and then at first, so he called I think through his dad's landline or something, and then his dad was like, John, is this from Kevin Mash?
Yeah, I can imagine. I know. Well,
and then John was like, what? And then you hear, how is this Kevin Clash? And John's like,
what?
I know.
Like what?
And he flipped out. I know. Well, I'll tell you something interesting. I didn't know about Jim's mentioning Johnny or where he saw Johnny, but what I do know.
Yeah, from the fan letter.
He had written a fan letter.
So
back
but I also think,
how much fan, how much he knows, how much.
Yeah.
Write letters,
fan.
people.
Oh yeah.
That's what he literally said. That's what he literally said.
But what's interesting about that too is that that's how Kevin got there as well. Do you know that story? You probably do. I mean, that Kevin was puppeteering as a kid. Where was he? Washington D.C. area, I think. I forget.
No, he was in Baltimore.
Baltimore, that's right. It's near Washington. Yep, there you are.
Which fun up with me and Matt are from Maryland.
I'm closer to Baltimore.
Sent a fan letter in.
Yeah.
And I forget, it wasn't Kermit Love, although he did end up working with Kermit Love, but whoever got the letter may have been Kermit Love, who was, by the way, not Kermit, but Kermit because he was simply Kermit, not after Kermit.
Yes, Kermit Love wasn't just named because of Kermit the Frog.
Because of Kermit. Pure coincidence.
Yes,
people.
exactly.
It just names Kermit because that's how that is. Anyway.
Yeah, and he was a man at that point when Kermit was in. Well, probably didn't, but he looked like Santa Claus. Kermit Love, very talented art director and builder, and a whole lot of other things. Who you should have an episode about too, probably. But they invited Kevin to New York when he was very, very young as well. Again, in the 14,
Yeah,
15.
during like his like high school like
Yeah,
senior
yeah,
trip or something.
yeah. And I think Kevin really felt, also uh, not beholden, but this, it was paying back, I would guess. I mean, Kevin never said that to me or anything, but for me, again, when you had this level of passion about building and performing, this is the kind of thing you did. I mean, you look out there for talent, and it starts young, and it's wonderful if you can nurture it. And for me, maybe even if it was subconscious, Kevin reached out because he had been reached out to, which I think made a lot of sense to me at any rate. And we got some, two incredible performers out of it, and sets of performances that were just amazing. Two real talents.
Yeah, so as we're
That's so
getting
funny.
close to wrapping up here, can you share any projects you're currently working on, at least that you're allowed to share?
Well, right now, no, it's not that I can't share them. I never know what they're going to be. I mean, we have a batch of, David and I have a batch of proposals. We write Bibles, basically short Bibles, because we find it easiest to do. And show Bibles, basically, people define them in different ways, but we come up with ideas and characters and all that. We have some things in with Netflix. We have no idea whether it's going to work. We just got turned down. See, this is what happens. We sent something that we really love, and if we could afford to produce it ourselves, we would, to PBS, and they're working on something similar. So you get a very nice note back saying, love this, but well, yeah, duh, it's on math, so what are you going to do? But they have another thing of ours they haven't turned down yet, and we're working again with this Canadian producer on some things, but I can't really talk about any of them, unfortunately.
That's okay.
And then the
worries.
country music, which we're just, I mean, again, we're very lucky. We are doing Sync. Also, Sync is a way for musicians to earn a living when they can't sell to, well, people who are very famous and only, deal with Nashville. It's commercials, it's on television, it's on film, it's on stuff like that. So we do have an agent for that, and we just keep writing. It's interesting too, because in a weird way, the pandemic has made it really useful it was easy for us because my co-writer, David, doesn't live, he lives about an hour away, and Janet lives in Boston, my music writer. And we were
cool.
always online anyway, so we sort of do it that way. But the truth is, even to tell you what we're doing, we just keep doing more. We just keep doing more and more and more and more and more, and hope, throw it against a wall and hope it sticks.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I'm from Massachusetts as well. I don't live in Boston, but I've gone to Boston many times.
I've been to Boston once.
Yeah. And a lot of,
Yeah.
I mean, it helps, for Nashville, for example, if we're writing country, it helps to live there. It really does. And there are writers' rooms and stuff like that, which is, it's, but the truth is yes, everybody needs the money and all that. But I also like the process so much that, I mean, if you don't love the process, Lord, don't go into don't do the work. It's you got to love it.
Exactly.
And keep
Yeah,
it
yeah,
focused
kind
and-
of like seeing puppeteer. Like you
Yeah.
gotta love it.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's not fun for you, it's just a time waste. Find if you can find something that you really love, which God knows is a stupid thing to say because I know so many people out there can't and don't. But whatever it is, I've been unbelievably lucky,
Yes.
to work with some people who are extraordinary.
Yes.
Just extraordinary. I mean, I can't take any credit for it other than a little bit of chutzpah when I was really, really young. But it's just, a lot of it is luck. But if you like it, keep doing it, no matter what. Sometimes it works.
Absolutely. So
Absolutely. So yeah, I'm looking forward to upcoming projects whenever it goes
I
live.
hope so. Your mouth too.
yes, absolutely.
And then
So
you're out there, take one of our shows. No.
yeah. So this last question that Jake's gonna ask is a question we ask all of our guests at the end. Go ahead, Jake.
Thank you, Chris. Of course, this podcast is called Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show. When you think of nostalgia, what do you think of? In your own words, how would you define the word nostalgia?
It's interesting. I have to admit that I looked it up online because I knew what I defined it as, and it's pretty much, I think nostalgia is a yearning for something that you loved in the past, some way of life, some way of being, something in your own life, something in the way that you think life was. And it's an interesting thing because for me, I think it's lovely to look back. And I think there's a lot, that you're doing that is really worthwhile, because I think documenting what happened, both at the time that it's happening, but the truth is that doesn't often happen because you don't really know what's happening until it's gone. I think that's incredibly useful. But I also feel like what this podcast should be more about, and maybe is more about, as I've been talking with you guys, is doing what you love now, taking what you loved then and figuring out how to do it now for an audience now. How do you want to do something or be somewhere or be someone that takes the best of what you love, the best of what we did, the best of what we had, and makes it something new and special and fresh, and work for today's audiences, work in today's lives. So I don't really think of you guys as a nostalgia show as much as I feel like you might be an inspiration show. Let's look back at how this was done. How were we lucky enough to get it done? And what do you want to take from that, you, our audience, or you guys yourselves as you create this? Because this podcast, a video podcast, is moving forward with this kind of work. And
for today's generation,
yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly. So that's how I would define it. But it's also, maybe you need to change your name or add something to it, because you're using nostalgia for more than that, really.
Absolutely. Great words to end on. Absolutely. Well, keep in touch, Louise. I'll let you know when this goes up.
Yes, thank you, Louise.
Thanks again. Lovely meeting you guys.
Lovely meeting
you as well.
Yes, you too.
Take care
And thank you so much. Thank you so much for what you've done over the years. And it means so much. For the three of us, you grew up with, what you've done, and it means very much. So thanks for being here.
It's lovely to hear, and everybody else, thank you for giving me the chance to do what I get to do. So.
And I cannot wait what next more in store, and keep up the great work.
Right.
Yes.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye, Louise.
Take care, Louise. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
It's goodbye from us as well. We absolutely enjoyed our time speaking with Louise Gikow. Keep on the lookout for more wonderful interviews coming your way. And as always, what do we say, Jake?
Keep nostalgia alive. Take care, everyone. See you next time. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another wonderful Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show episode. Be sure to follow Jake and the Happy Nostalgia team on social media, check out our website, and stream the show wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And as always, remember to keep nostalgia alive. Bye-bye.